Welcome to the Storytelling with Data podcast, where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Alex.
I'm going to kick this episode off by asking you to think about the difference between elevator music and a live concert. Both are musical experiences, but one exists only in the background, non-intrusive and emotionless, whereas the other leaves a lasting impression. Now, if you think about it, this continuum, this spectrum, can really apply to almost any space, but especially data visuals. You might imagine the elevator music represents a standard chart of bars and lines, the kind that are often used in business communications for a very specific purpose. They're useful, but they're not always the most memorable. And on the other end of the spectrum, when we think about live concert music, we might relate it to bespoke, interactive visual works of art that really draw you in, pique your curiosity, and have this strong emotional response. Now, this analogy is not one I created, but rather it comes from a new book that just landed on my doorstep, Chart by Nadieh Bremer. And I'm actually super excited to welcome Nadieh onto the podcast today. So, hello, Nadieh, and thanks for coming back to the Storytelling with Data podcast.
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. And I love that intro. Yes, I see how comes from the introduction of the
Yes,
book.
exactly. And so, Nadieh, I know this is the first time we are meeting, but I actually feel like I just saw you because I was able to catch your talk at the Outlier conference a couple of weeks ago, where you launched the book. You were joined by the designer of the book, Julie Brunet.
Yes, I thought it would be interesting to show some behind the scenes of how we ended up at the design of the final layout.
And for those listening, once the recording is available of that talk, I will certainly try to link it because it was a fantastic talk where you could see all the different cover creations, how they designed it, their process of working together back and forth. And I just want to say congrats to both of you because this is a beautiful book. It is something that you want to display on the coffee table. It is gorgeous to flip through.
Thank you, thank you. That was definitely an intent from the get go. Even when I put up I was writing a book proposal. It was like I want this to be something that teaches you something, but also like partly coffee table book with too many words, but still something you want to put on the table or display proudly in your bookcase. And I also knew from the get go that I wanted to have Julie be the designer of that.
Had you worked with her before?
In a way, she's the designer also for Nightingale magazine from the Data Visualization Society, and I've known her work, and I knew that she also did layouts, and I loved her layouts. And we met at a conference, and by the end of the conference, I was like, "So, Julie, would you maybe want to do my book?"
So we'll dive more into the book in a moment, but I thought it would be helpful for our listeners if you could just share more about yourself. So your journey, your background into the data visualization space. Like how did you go from just getting into data visualization to now publishing your second book?
Yes, it was not pre-planned, that's for sure. So my background, I think it's 2011. I graduate as an astronomer and not really knowing what I wanted to do, and I rolled into becoming a data scientist for Deloitte Consulting. Still working with data, using similar kind of techniques, but instead of inspecting or learning about the stars, it was about what do people buy and mortgages and other customer segmentations, predictive models. And we often had to present once a week, as consultants often do. And so I was creating a lot of data visualizations, but I also always saw them as being a part of my job as a data scientist. But after about 4 years, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And like I was kind of like, oh, another predictive model, yay. I was missing the passion. I'm like, other people still have that, but I was just kind of missing it. And then I went to a data science conference and I saw a talk by Mike Freeman, great talk, by the way. And I remember sitting there, it was early, and I looked up and he plugged in his laptop. And on the first slide, it said, data visualization specialist. And I know it sounds silly, but it hit me like lightning. It's like, wait, you can specialize in data visualization? And everything just seemed to fall in place. It's like, oh, right, data visualization. That's all I want to do. That's where I spend my evenings on tweaking the slides of the presentation that we have to do, learning all of the ways PowerPoint could be mishandled to make it work in my favor. And so from that moment, I knew that I wanted to be able to call myself a data visualization specialist one day too. So that was around 2014, 15, I think. And so in my free time, I started reading any book that I could get my hands on, like The Functional Art by Alberto Cairo, also of course Tufte's classics, and Stephen Few. At the time, we were also doing dashboards as consultants. And I guess after a year, I learned more and got to do it on the job, but I want to do it even more. And so I switched roles to becoming a data visualization designer for dashboards at Adyen, which is a payment service provider like Stripe. But doing dashboards, which had become my preferred tool, which is D3JS. After a year, I realized that my passion lies really specifically in the more creative, bespoke kinds of data visualizations, not dashboards. I want to make things that also visually make an impact, are lasting, and really always be able to do it slightly differently. So because each data set and each goal has a different sort of good way to do it. At that same time, I started Data Sketches, which was a year-long collaboration that I did with Shirley Wu, a really, really good friend, and where we made these sort of very elaborate data visualizations each month around one topic. So, for example, the first topic was movies, and so we both made a visualization about movies. I did one about Lord of the Rings, and she did one about summer blockbusters, and that we did that 12 times, and that was really great. That really showed me like, this is what I want to do. And then halfway through, Google News Lab actually approached us to ask, like, do you maybe want to collaborate with us for one of your data sketches months? And we were both like, yes, please. We'd love to work with Google and getting access to data that we normally wouldn't have access to. But also, it was a way for me to become a freelancer with Google as my first client. So that gave me enough of a financial, how do you say that,
Confidence,
security
maybe?
to
Yeah.
then, yes, confidence. Yes. I looked at everything, like how long can I manage without any other client besides Google? And then otherwise, I felt like as a data scientist, hopefully I would always be able to find my way back into business. So that was at the start of 2017. I became a freelancer, really focusing on this sort of creative side of data viz. And I've been, I know we're nearing 10 years, but I've been very happily doing that ever since. The variety and clients that I got to work with, from newspapers to giant tech corporations to small startups to even professors, because I still love working on more scientific and especially astronomy related data sets. But yeah, that's how I turned into a data viz creator working for myself.
I mean, that's an awesome journey. So, did I catch it right? Astronomy to data
Not really,
scientist
but
to data visualization specialist to freelancer. And then I'll just throw in the ends of the author, right? And I'd even go in as far as to say artist at this point.
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, wow. So let's talk about some of these titles. And actually, I want to dig into one just based on some conversations that I've had with some of our followers here. And you mentioned it a little bit, but freelancer. I've had so many conversations with folks lately, and it might just be the times that we're in that more and more people are looking for other ways to supplement income. But a lot of people are considering going out on their own. So you've done it. You've clearly been successful. It's led to new titles for yourself. Do you have any advice for the person that's weighing, do you stay working for a company or do you maybe try doing something on your own?
Oh, that's tough. I feel like I have all of the very obvious answers there, where on the one hand, the easy one to say is, if you feel, if it's gonna gnaw on you that you never did it eventually, then try and do it, because you will always feel like a what if. However, there are of course a lots of it depends. So something that I did, and also again that depends on whether or not your employer is open to it, but actually I started freelancing 2 days in a week for the first 6 months. So I was working part-time at my job still, and then doing freelancing for 2 days.
Interesting.
And then after about 6 months, I had enough clients to fill up my entire time. And then I said goodbye to my employers. Like, I think this is gonna work. I'm sorry, but I'm leaving. So that was for me also a way to be sure that I still, like, even if I had no clients and with some savings, I was able to do that. I also had the privilege of not having kids in a way, so I didn't have like responsibilities. I had a mortgage, but I also have a partner, so there was also something to fall back on too. I didn't have any student debt anymore in the Netherlands. Things are just
A little
a
different.
little different than the United States. So I was, in that sense, I felt like after putting everything together and the way the economy was with data science, where scientists were looking for them everywhere, it just felt like I really want to try this. I think this is where my passion lies. And there is enough, it's like it's a scary step, but I have enough securities and things that I can take it. And I don't think I will, even if it doesn't work out. I have many outs, and so that's why I tried it. But it really depends on each person. But I do feel like if there is this sort of, if you're feeling really unhappy in your current job and you feel that going freelancing will be a way out of that, either because you could be your own boss or you can do other things that you think where your true passion lies, I think that is really important. It makes such a difference to be able to work during the day on something that you truly enjoy in a way that you enjoy. You're actually willing to give up a lot for that, even if it's less pay. Like I was going for less pay than I was making at this company as a freelancer, and other things like you might have to work in the weekends. Your vacations are never really, you can never really, how do you say that?
Turn it off.
Yes, yes, because I mean, in one hand, you are your own boss, but on the other hand, you have nothing that you can push everything to if you're sick or if you're on vacation, for example. But there's flexibility there. So it's hard to say, but if you have this drive, see if you can find a way to try it out that feels safe to you, because it could definitely be very worth it.
Yeah, no, I think you shared a lot of advice. I like this idea of sort of having one foot in the door, one foot out, so you have backup
Hmm.
plans. But you also mentioned that in 6 months you were able to get a lot of clients. I have to imagine that has to do with just starting these personal projects. I mentioned the project with Shirley Wu with the data sketches that ultimately led to your first paying client. So is there something about like developing a portfolio to maybe attract clients? Like how did you get all those clients so quickly? I feel like that's the piece that makes people stay up at night.
Oh, it's a very fair point. I think you are very right. It has to do with portfolio. So for me, when I discovered that I wanted to do data visualization, I felt very alone. Like if I looked online, all of these people were not in the Netherlands. That was eventually I found people in the Netherlands, but at the start I just didn't know. And so I started a blog and it went on Twitter. But on the blog, I would share things that I had learned and projects that I had made. I just shared the design process in a way to give back, because I learned so much from the internet as well. So I learned how to make a dashed line animate. I don't know, it's like these silly kind of things. And I would write like a little tutorial around it and I would put it on my blog, and then I would show the visual that I created it for, like a spirograph creator. But I create other things, and this was sort of before I even had the inclination of starting to freelance, because I thought I'm never going to freelance. It's way too scary to freelance. But I simply wanted to connect. And that was a way for me to connect also on social media. I got to connect with other people. They saw my work. There was something to talk about. So that was really great. And somehow I would then sometimes get emails from possible clients asking me like, "Oh, we like your style. Do you maybe want to create this for us?" And I would have to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm actually already fully employed. I'm not working on my own." So I knew that there were already some signals that maybe if I would start to freelance, it would turn into something. And then with starting data sketches, which was really beyond Shirley and my sort of imagination, was received well. And that really helped also, because it was halfway through data sketches that I then went into freelance, and because of the project also had a momentum, it was easy to lift on that and then get more exposure again and building up that portfolio again. I guess for as a data scientist, I would think it's much harder, but for data visualization, it's such a visual thing. So you can make examples to show to a client, like, does this person have the style that we're looking for? Can they do interactive or static or other types of styles? So that really helps the client to be able to say, well, we wanna reach out to them to see if they will work for us. So yeah, and also I think it was the times. This was 2017. I think before COVID, there were a lot less people doing the visualization. So there is this a little bit of a first movers advantage that I had there that I'm really lucky for. But yeah, it was also hard work. I will say that I spent many weekends and evenings making things, making personal projects. Like I'm a transmitter. I make stuff, I throw it out in the world, and then I hope that some of it comes back. So,
Exactly. No, I think that's fantastic advice for all those listening that are considering going out on their own. Create a portfolio, test things in small ways, have backup plans, and hopefully follow your passion. So, we talked about your time as a freelancer. I threw out another title out there, and I think we've said it in different ways and maybe skirted around this idea of creativity and art. And I really think that's the premise of your book, expanding this idea that data can be art. And so I'm curious to hear from you, How do you define data art? Do you think of it as a subset of data visualization? Is it something completely on its own? Just how do you think of it?
To me personally, I see data visualization and data art as sort of a sliding scale. Also in the book, I talk about this where I say on the sort of on one end of the scale, you have the very pure straightforward data visualizations, a bar chart, a line chart, no nonsense. It's like it's almost following like Tufte's data ink ratio to the max. It's only data, that's all there is. And if you start moving on towards the other end of the scale, you start putting in a little bit more creativity. Maybe your line charts have like a little bit more of a design flourish to them that makes it just a little bit more appealing to the eye. Instead, you start making a little bit more complex things, adding more layers. And then you get to the other end of this sort of spectrum where I think there's data art. And here, so on the data visuals, like the pure no nonsense data visualization, it's all about the data. It's all about conveying the data as fast as possible, as least error prone as possible. On the other hand, we have data art where it's all about emotions. It's all about making people feel something or maybe evoking an action. But like it's a difference between the head and the heart in a
Yeah, I
way.
love
That's
that.
how I see this like going from one end to the other end. And I think it's a gray area. I think it's not where something suddenly flips over from being data viz to data art. It's really a gray area, and I think for everybody it's different where they would define one thing or the other thing. I mean, I'm sure we can say that maybe like the most basic line chart is not data art, but you can be very creative and still tell a story with the data that is about the values of the data. And then there are other data arts where you look at it and you read what it's about and you have no idea what values are in there. Like I have no idea what I'm looking at, like data wise, but I know how the data is woven into this, and that makes me feel something. Like for example, one chapter I talk about a project I got to do for UNICEF, where I'm creating this big collection of artworks that is based on schools. So they have the Giga project where they try and connect all of the schools in the world to the internet because it promotes a lot of good things for the kids. And they wanted to have this collection for donations. And I took all of that data from the school. So they knew for about 300,000 schools, mostly in developing countries, if they were or were not connected. And then a few other things like how fast is the connection, what type of connection, country, and so on. And I turned that into sort of a very childlike, whimsical depiction of cities like kingdoms, where we have all of the schools connected to the internet, where these sort of blocks stacked on top of each other with complex decorations. And then the schools not connected, they were kind of stacked down. They were like a mirror image, like a hidden city under the ground. They are not yet connected, so they're more muted. But if you look at that image for the first time, it's like you don't think there's data there, but secretly each of the little squares on each artwork is a unique school that has gotten like decorations based on all of its data. So that's where data art can be pretty wide. Like it doesn't have to make sense anymore. You don't have to use legends, and you can use ways of transforming data into visual elements that don't work well for our visual means, but that's okay. Or you can also make data art in Play-Doh, but the book mostly focuses on data art on the screen in 2D. Yeah.
I love that. I know the piece that you're talking about, and I'll see if I can link it for listeners. It's beautiful, and it has all these colored squares that are connected with each other. And I understand what you mean, where it's everything has meaning, everything is intentional and ties back to data, but it's not that you look at it and you're meant to have this big insight that's going to change your viewpoint, but rather really make you curious and start to think about all these different schools and how they're connected.
Exactly.
I like this idea of it being a spectrum or a continuum, and I think it maybe even evolves over time because as you were talking, I couldn't help but think that if you had asked me data viz versus data art, and you said like a line chart probably isn't data art. I mean, maybe 10, 15 years ago, if all I was doing is using a spreadsheet, a line chart may have been data art at that point for me. So it's this idea that it maybe evolves as your skill set and your knowledge of the field continues to expand. And I think that's something that you've captured in the book is that you're constantly pushing the boundaries of what visuals inspired by data could potentially be.
Yes, that's sort of the outline of the book where it puts in more and more and more creativity with each new chapter. Yes.
So Speaking of the chapter, right, the book is divided into 4 sections, and I guess it starts more with the traditional, as you mentioned before, where it's like staying close to those ordinary charts. Then it gets a little bit more creative. You start adding the creativity, visual elements in there. Then you start looking for visual diversity, and then the final section is like that deep dive off the platform into this artistic world that you're talking about here. Now, I imagine most of our listeners probably are in the space of the ordinary charts, right? They're communicating visuals in business. And I feel like there's this push and pull here where in business, you want the basic bar with the insight, but maybe people want to be a little bit more creative. They don't want to just churn out the same bar chart over and over again. So, do you have tips for how they could start to be more creative, but still design with their audience and the goal in mind of communicating an insight? Like, how do you incorporate data art
Yes.
into business, I guess?
Yes, so then it's more about being subtle, because yes, on the business side, it is important that you convey the data in a pretty sort of straightforward way without first having to read through the entire legend, maybe. But the downside is that people have seen, especially in business, they've seen bar charts, and they're not strange enough to be memorable. And so if you want that bar chart to stick around, maybe you need to add a little bit more to make it stand out. As one example, it's a slightly silly example, but it worked really well, where I had a client, and I talk about this one in the book as well, but they were the Swiss energy, like the high voltage lines, and they wanted a visualization about the growth of solar panels. Well, I had a big map, all things were happening about where solar panels were popping up, but they also wanted like a little line chart about the dropping price of solar panels. And I put that on the map, and it was just a little boring line chart. It just didn't fit well with the detailed map. And so what I ended up doing is I placed a little like contour lines behind the line chart. Like, so there was the contour lines of the Matterhorn, a famous mountain in Switzerland. And it's like, because the line chart of the solar panels was also kind of like a little mountain going down, down, down further. I had three of these line charts with the contour lines behind it, because Switzerland famous for the mountains. So there was this sort of topical metaphor there for Switzerland. And then eventually the client came back to me and said, like, yeah, the mountain line charts. And that's how when they showed this sort of animation to clients, they kind of stuck out, and to talk about them, and they stuck in the minds of the people looking at them, like the mountain line charts. So that was fun. That was when I wanted to create. But that's sort of in general what my advice is, that you look at the topic of your data set, and you see, like, is either each specific data point something that I can find inspiration from, or is the topic in general something that I can find inspiration from? I have another example about a visualization about the Olympics. So I made five circles for the Olympic symbol. But another one was about where the client wanted to show like how much they grew each of their offices. And it was a big corporation, but it wasn't giant, like in the hundreds of employees. And so I transformed the bar charts into little diamonds stacked together. So each person became a diamond, like each person was actually present there, instead of having this sort of one bar representing 237 people, for example. It's like it's these little things. Like if you have something about music, I made circles look like vinyl records instead of just being circles. Like it's these little touches, and especially if it fits with the topic of your data, I think that works well. And you don't want to go overboard. Like I'm not personally a fan of overusing icons. Like for example, if you bar chart about like financial things, maybe you don't use dollar bills necessarily stacked on top of each other, but I like, you can try and be a little bit more subtle than that. Like I had a visualization about airplanes, but I made them look like triangles instead of actual
Like the wings,
airplanes.
they're flying or something. Okay,
Yes,
I get it.
exactly. So that's, to me personally, also because too many uses of icons generally makes it a little bit more cluttered and appear a little bit less professional, especially if you have to look at it multiple times. So it's about finding this balance between using metaphors and shapes, or additions, or these kinds of things. So it's subtle things that can make your bar chart stand out nonetheless, even if you don't go all the way to like in data art route.
Right. So it's just sort of finding that unique aspect that you can add that makes it visually stand out, but doesn't sacrifice the insight if that is the goal and the premise of why you're communicating the chart in business. One of the ways that I sometimes feel myself being pulled where I want to be a little bit more creative, but I know it's going to be simpler to use the bar chart for my audience is experimenting with different chart types, something more unique. Is this
Mhm.
something you encountered when you were still in the space where you're working for a company, but you like this like personal creative side? And if so, like how did you strike the right balance between keeping it simple and maybe introducing your audience to a new, unique visual way of seeing the data? I think you have an example in the book where it's like the tabular income statement versus a Sankey diagram.
Yes, yes, that's true. For me, at the start, I remember this distinctly. I was still working at Deloitte. I just discovered that data visualization was what I wanted to do, and this whole realm of other chart forms opened up to me. And I didn't quite have the feeling yet also myself of knowing like this data set works well with this kind of chart type. And what I would do then is if I were to create a chart, I thought, well, maybe this chart works as well. I would just give myself a little bit of time to try and create it in this other form and then see if it worked. And if I thought it worked, I would then show my manager as like, maybe we can visualize this as like a Sankey diagram or an alluvial or a bubble chart or even a network. And that didn't always work. Sometimes it was too difficult for them and they're like, no, the client's never going to get that. And then other times it was like, yes, this looks very interesting. Maybe you can explore that more. So that was a really sort of productive way for me to try and not too much, but just with the moments that I thought there might be a chance, like, okay, I'll take a little bit of time, but not too much. And there are tools that let you make some of these more exotic charts. Like I personally like raw graphs a lot, RAW. So they have a lot of these more unusual charts and you don't have to program them. But I think another important thing is knowing about these other charts. Like you first need to expand your own sort of horizon of knowing what's out there, what other people have done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And that will give you more experience on knowing like in this like for a Sankey diagram it's all about flows. If you have a flow, something like a money flow, that's what I had. Like I had money flowing in and then flowing out again and you have a net revenue at the end. So that was a perfect fit. But I would never have come up with a Sankey diagram on my own. So that's where that really helped. And you also have like things like the database project or the database catalog where they have all of these little examples of charts and they tell you when to use it or what tool could create it for you. But that would be my suggestion, to play around with it, get this experience, build it up, and then knowing in the future, like, oh, well, we have this chart. It works as a bar chart, but actually, I think it would work better as a chart. And then hopefully you're in a position where you have a little bit of freedom to quickly make some sort of mock-up to see if you can convince your peers or your manager that it's the right way to go.
Yeah, I think you named a couple of really important things here. So getting feedback, having a two-way conversation with how somebody else will receive it, not just throwing something crazy and
Mm-mm.
convoluted at your audience and hoping they like it, but mocking up this idea of maybe starting in a low tech way where you're not investing all the energy building something
Right.
out and using that, giving somebody something visual to react to and using that to then refine further. And I actually think that's a great seg into talking more about your process. You have these really awesome visuals in your book, and I look at them and I'm like, how in the world did you create them? So I'd love to learn more about your process. Before we do that, let's take a quick break.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying our chat with Nadieh and feel inspired by her creative approach to data visualization. If you're looking for even more inspiration, especially when it comes to communicating with data in business, we are excited to announce our newest book, Storytelling with Data Before and After. We share 20 powerful makeovers that illustrate practical lessons like how to find the right level of detail, why you shouldn't tell stories with dashboards, and the core principles that lead to a well-designed slide. Before and After comes out this fall, but is available for pre-order now. And if you can't wait, head over to storytellingwithdata.com/books to download a free sample. That's right, a free sample at storytellingwithdata.com/books.
And we're back. So, when we left off earlier, we had talked a little bit about data art. We'd started to talk about your experience as a freelancer, and now we're getting into your time as a freelancer, investigating, pushing the boundaries of data art, how you started to sort of strike the balance between traditional and novel. And one of the things I really want to dive into is, what does your process look like? Like, how do you create these really beautiful pieces? Is there any sort of consistent process, or is everything unique every single time you do it?
Oh gosh, no. Thankfully, there are some things that are kind of the same, although in the details everything is different. But in general, I would say my process can be split into 3 or 4 stages, and they're not at all evenly timed. Some of them are short, and others take a very long time. So I start out. Let's say it's a client project. The client reaches out, and I have an initial call to understand what they want, and we can see if I'm the right fit. But let's say it is, then my initial process would be I need to understand the data and I need to understand the goals. Like, what do you want? Do you want a static small piece that is viewed by an audience while on social media in the subway? Or are we talking about like something that you want to put in a museum and people should interact with it? Should be majorly interactive, just to have two ends of the scale. But I need to understand all of these things. I need to understand sort of what should people learn, what is the target audience, what is the intended location that people are going to consume the audience, what is the type of media that this visualization will be displayed in, and all of these things together will then give me an idea of what I should strive for. And then if I have the data, I will then go into a phase of sort of data analysis for myself. So I'm trying to build up this sort of mental model of how is the data interconnected? How does it look? I make lots of little charts at that time, like histograms, bar charts, scatter plots. I do this in R, which is a statistical program like Python. But yeah, there's just lots of very simple, ugly charts. And then together with what I know, what the goal the client wanted to get from this data set, I then go into the next phase, which is designing. And for this, I sketch. So you'll see a lot of sketches in the book, like hand drawn sketches, either in a little notebook or on my iPad if I want to work with colors a little bit more freely. And because it's for me, the initial part is really about the abstract, fundamental way that I want to convert my data into visual elements. Like, am I going to place it all in a circle, or am I going for something where things are connected by a line? Am I going to scale the circles by this? Or like, it's, I need to know like how am I going to place things, and it's not at all about the details or fonts or colors. It's just about sort of the shape of it all. I usually try and have like 3 or 4 different sort of design directions for the client. Sometimes one really jumps out, but usually it's about 4. And then I discuss this with the client and we decide to go with a certain direction. And then I go into the biggest phase by far, which is the creation. And I program all of my visuals. I use JavaScript and D3.js a lot, and I program it, and I kind of set up like a hidden URL where the client can see the progress of the visualization. And I send them every so often, I will send an email with some of the updates, and maybe I show them like we can go in this direction or we can go in this other direction. And then they give me feedback and I continue. And that goes on for a while, depends on the scope of the project. And then at the end, well, it's sort of the deliverable. If it's sort of a static visualization that it ends up in a newspaper, I did deliver sort of the final files. Or if it's interactive, I might give them like a function, and then your developers are now in charge. Or a website, where I had that for Google, where they just wanted me to make a website. So yeah, that's. But then in the details, everything is different. But this is broadly the phases that I go through for each project.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful to have this blueprint for what each project will look like, and also a sense of where you're going to spend the most time. The things that stuck out to me as you were talking through your process was, one, how much effort and how many steps there are before you actually create the visual. This probably
Yeah.
sounds like common sense to you as a designer, but I think a lot of analysts and so forth, when they're asked to embark on a project, you just start creating the content. You just create the graph or whatever the final medium will be. But the real value happens in making sure that you understand what success is going to look like, experimenting with different forms and how it could be so that you can be more creative and ultimately land on what that final visual should be, and having something tangible that you can share with somebody else to get the feedback before you ever even start programming.
Yes, yeah, it really, yes, that's one of the things I also give as tips in the past when I was still giving workshops is like, first you need to understand why are you visualizing this data? What, it's not about plotting the data, it's about answering like a question with the data. And that like if you simply have that, if you can write down like this is what you need to get from this data set, this is what it needs to do, you are like so far ahead of like the average person making plots.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not about the chart, but see if you can put it into a sentence. And trust me, you're doing a lot more in terms of articulating and communicating to your audience beyond where most people are. I'm curious. So you mentioned a lot of time is also spent on sort of data cleaning and analysis. And this is more of a curious question because it's something I'm wrestling with myself. But have you started to play around with like using AI for any of that? I'm one of the people that maybe finds AI to, I'm a little skeptical of where I could use it in the process because I feel like sketching and talking to people is something that should still happen by an actual human and a person, and it takes time,
Yes.
and we can't just replace it with a tool. But a lot of people are trying to figure out, is AI going to change the visualization process? And I'm just curious if you've experimented with it at all.
I have experimented with it. I feel like I'm probably not using it as much as I
Yeah.
could, but I'm definitely using it as like my junior developer kind of the co-pilot where I'm just typing like I make a bar chart that shows this versus this in for example in R when I'm doing my analysis and it just plops out the code in ggplot is how they say that and that helps me because that saved me like 2 minutes and maybe one Google to figure out how to make that bar chart again. So it does make my process faster. And it actually, what I enjoy is that I get most joy out of creating the visual, like making it appear on the screen and transforming it and shaping it. I'm not, I know coding in itself is a means to do that, but I don't get joy from actually typing the code and making beautiful code. So with this sort of copilot, it just takes chunks of the boring stuff of code away. I mean, there's still a lot that I need to do because it's not nearly right it's like I still need to be able to check everything that I wrote to see where the errors might be and see what it's actually doing. But it is making it's just been really helpful in making my process faster so I can really focus again on iterating and the design elements and not about the code. But I've tried using it for inspiration a little bit. Like I have this idea and I'm not really good with drawing, so I draw something and then I try and say, well, make this look better of what I have in mind. And that is like worked 1 in 5 times for
Okay.
now, which is also could be my prompting skills, but it's like yeah, I'm not there yet, but I do want to see if maybe that is more of a thing. But other than that, I'm not automating anything. I do feel still that it really helps to dig into the data yourself to really build up what is in the data. And also with the design part of it, it just really that's where I'm enjoying myself, like oh, figuring out, oh, maybe I should try gradient, maybe I should try like a little grain or other things, and taking that away is like, yeah, it's like the fun part of it. I don't want to give that away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think that's where humans shine. I like how you're incorporating it. You're still in the driver's seat, but using it to improve efficiencies, take away the pieces of the process that you don't necessarily enjoy that are maybe a little bit more mundane and can be automated, but
Exactly.
you're still being the creative element and the driving force behind the piece. So we still know it's not
Yes.
okay. We've talked a lot about different projects here, but you have so many projects. If anyone browses your website or looks through your book, there's so many examples. And so I'd love to hear from you. If somebody's going to focus in on one example to get to know you, what is your favorite? And talk us through it.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's a tough question. I think there's one example. It's called Why Do Cats and Dogs?
I'm excited that you bring this up.
I feel like there's two. There's also one that's called Space Wars for Scientific American, which is a static. But this Why Do Cats and Dogs is a maybe one of my biggest projects I ever did. It was also for Google. And I got access to a data set about the most popular questions that people ask on Google about well, why does my cat or why does my dog, and then some variations for that. And then looking at the trends in that, and it was such an interesting data set. Like the meme of the cat versus cucumber had just passed, and so there were lots of questions: why are cats afraid of cucumbers, or why do cats don't like cucumbers? Which was fun. And I had a very long analysis phase, really digging through these questions, trying to find themes. There were a lot of people asking, why do dogs eat? And then dot dot dot. Why do they eat poop and grass? Or and even the poop was a very specific, like birds poop or other dog poop or horse poop. It's like every animal's poop was in there.
I laugh, probably searched for things online with my dog.
Yes, so it's very relatable. That's also what I loved. I have two cats, so I found myself also very relating very much to the cat questions. And I just love working on these sort of more like not so serious topics, but ones that just make it put a smile on your face. And so for the visualization, I had a lot of I got a lot of space to make things. So I dug through this data set and I visualized it in like 4 different ways, all of them interactive and some of them even changing shape and size on mobile. I hired an illustrator to make these very cute dog and cat illustrations. And so it took me 3 or 4 months to create, but it was so much fun all the way through. But there was also some technical things that, oh man, I mean, I never realized it before with that project. Like on desktop, you can click things and hover things, and they do things, and like you may click things and you have a tooltip. But on mobile, suddenly it's like touching things, and if you there's no hover. If you move or if you touch it, it's there. And
Click it.
how does it go away? You have to click somewhere else, or the tooltip is suddenly in the way, or you can't read it, so you need to move it down to the page. Like there were all of these things that I had to then take care of. Like, oh, desktop versus mobile. It's like a small screen versus a really big screen. But that was also part of what kind of made it interesting because like, oh, I'll do it this way if it's big and this way if it's small. But yeah, it was such a fun data set. I could relate to it really well. I got this large creative freedom to get as much of this sort of story that I wanted to. And yeah, so I ended up, in terms of design style, I made it sketchy, like actual sketchy, like the circles are drawn in a sketchy way. They're filled in by scratches. The other design elements of the page are like, if you have a box, it's like scratched around the box. And so I also put a big focus on making it look very whimsical and playful to go and hover over anything, just to give people joy while they browse through this sort of giant data set of what people ask about their cats and dogs.
Did you learn anything unique as you went through this that surprised you about cats or dogs?
Oh my gosh, I know that there are a few things that stood out to me. There was a question about why do cats like to eat fake Christmas trees?
Oh,
I didn't know
I didn't know
that.
that either.
I didn't know that was a thing. And now I have a new cat and he likes to eat plastic. So suddenly I'm like,
You
yeah, I could see
understand
you.
it.
I feel you. And there was another one that was like, why does my cat poop in the litter box and pee outside? And like literally, there was another question that was, why does my cat pee in the litter box and poop outside? I'm like, these two need to talk to each other.
These guys should trade notes because they could make it all work in the
Yes,
litter box. Oh,
exactly.
for those listening, we'll link it. It's available online. It's also in the book. It is in a really awesome piece. And it's one of these things that I like about it, Nadia, is there's so much data, but it starts sort of smaller where you sort of walk us
Mhm.
through it a little bit about dogs and cats. And then it becomes this exploration of you can click on anything that you want and ask almost any
Mhm.
question. And then it links straight to Google and you can find your answer. So it's just a nice journey, and you can be as curious as you want about dogs and cats, which is fun.
Thanks. Yes, yes, that's exactly it. It starts small because the data set is a bit big, so don't want to give you everything all at once.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a lesson we just came up with here of how to communicate when you have a really broad data set. Give something small, pique their curiosity, and then encourage them to dig further.
Exactly. Yes.
So, speaking of wisdom that you were spewing to us today, any final words or advice that you have for folks that are just getting into the field that want to design their career just like you've done here? What would you say to your younger self?
I think parts of it we've already talked about, but I think it would be, on the one hand, create. So it's really important to create data visualizations, even if it's in your own time, if you can, because with each new project that you make, you get more experience. Even if you think you don't, you learn more about whatever tool is your tool of choice. You get more expertise there, even if it doesn't work out. It's funny to see how sometimes these things can come back around again in another project where you feel like, oh, it didn't work here, but it's actually perfect for here. And you have something to put in your portfolio. And then that's the second thing. I would highly recommend building up a portfolio, even if it's just a simple page, especially if you want to start out on your own. Have some place where people can see what you make, and be very strict there with your portfolio. Only show things that you want to be hired for, even if you can do other things. Don't fill up your portfolio because you feel like you need more projects. Only do the ones that you actually want to get hired for. So I think that for me is the two most important things: create and make that portfolio, and then that's sort of the stepping stone to get started.
Yeah, great advice. I love the tailoring it for the job that you want, not necessarily just showing off
Me.
everything you've ever done. And so if people want to explore your book, see all the beautiful examples, learn more about what you do, where would they go? Where can they find your book? Can they learn more about you?
I would say that they can find it generally in bookstores. So it's called Chart, just simply Chart, because there's art in there. My publisher is Routledge, so you can find it on their website as well, which I would recommend. They have free shipping all over the world, so that's good. But yeah, otherwise, general bookstores, that should be available.
Great. So free shipping probably puts it above
Yes.
Amazon, right? Then that's maybe where I should have got my copy.
Yes.
All right, everyone listening, get it from the publisher. We'll link it in the notes here. And I thought we'd end out today's episode with something fun. I like to leave on a happy note. And so this was a game that they played at the Outlier conference, but they played a round of Marry, Kiss, and Kill Chart Edition. Are you familiar with that game?
I vaguely, yes. I think I've seen it played, but never played it myself.
Okay, so the idea is you pick 3 charts and you decide
Yes.
which chart would you marry. So which chart do you want to have a long life with? You'll never stop using as a designer. Which one would you totally kill? You never want to see it again. And which would you kiss? Maybe you want to experiment with it. So what would you say for your marry, kiss, and kill?
Oh my gosh. What if the marry and the kill is the same one in a way?
Oh, so you're getting a divorce.
Yes, maybe with like a hot love-hate relationship. I have something with network diagrams where on the one hand, I love working with network diagrams and showing connections, and on the other hand, they are so hard to not turn into a hairball. So I also kind of want to kill them for that. But let's see, marry. Yeah, I really do like the Sankey diagrams. I think they're so intuitive and they're so like if they fit so well. They stay with you. So that might be like I never want to not use Sankey diagrams anymore. Let's see, and kill. Well, I mean, there's always the network charts, but which other one? Do you know the sunburst diagrams?
Yes.
It's like a pie chart on steroids in a way.
That's a great way to describe it.
It's not specifically something against pie charts, but usually one of the downsides of pie charts is that it's used with too many slices, and somehow with the sunburst diagram, it gets slices on top of slices.
Yeah, it would make it even worse.
And so, yeah. And then sort of the kiss one, that one I find hard. I think I've never really used the bullet chart, and I know it sounds silly. It's just such a straightforward dashboarding kind of one. And I feel like maybe I should acquaint myself with it a little more, start chatting to it. It's like maybe I should have it in the back of my mind to start using here ones in there.
That was not what I was going to expect you to say. Interesting. Like all these crazy, like evolved charts and then the bullet chart. I want to experiment with it. Back to basic parts. I love it.
I know, it's so silly.
All right, well, this has been an awesome chat. For those listening, check the notes. We'll have plenty of links for you to further explore Nadieh's work. And Nadieh, just big thanks to you. Congrats on your new book. And I can't wait to see what else you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's great.